Hey everyone, it's Tiffany Dean Cosplay, finally back with a new video to start off the new year. I hope everyone had an amazing Christmas and New Year's if that's what you celebrate. If you don't, I still hope you had an amazing time, whether you're on holiday or not, or if you've got celebrations to come, I hope you have an amazing time. So straight into it. So the first video of the year is how I made my Shadowheart Camp Vest, which is this one. Oh. I used the FD Studios pattern as I'd had a lot of friends who I'd seen use it and the results looked amazing, and I've also seen a lot of people struggle with the pattern, so I've made this video in the hopes that it helps those to make it, especially if this is a pattern that you're looking to use, and especially as somebody who is a non-sewer like me. Those that have been following my content for a little while know that armor is definitely my jam, not sewing, and this was quite a big project for me, quite a learning curve. So without further ado, I shall show you how I put this together. Enjoy! Okay, up first we have a breakdown of the template. As mentioned in the intro, this is by FD Studios, and the instructions aren't amazing, unfortunately, so I'm just trying to break everything down. It wasn't clear if there was a seam allowance, if there wasn't, where you should be sewing on the fold, even where pieces attach. They're just kind of numbered like 1 through to whatever number there are. But I did conclude that that edge that you can see that looks about 1 centimeter thick, that is a seam allowance. But this piece, for example, that I'm holding here attaches to a different piece, and there is nothing in the instructions advising of any of this. So I would recommend labeling everything so it's clear for you. So label what you want to do on the fold and label where each piece attaches. I then proceeded to cut all of these seam allowances off purely because they just didn't really make sense. They were in some areas and they're not in areas where I would think that they should be. And cutting it off just made it easier. So you screenshot that if that helps. But yeah, I cut it off. So as you can see here, as I'm now tracing the template onto the actual outer fabric, I did do a mock-up first, which I would highly recommend, just so you can make sure the fit is where you want. I did this in extra small, and I found it to be on the slightly larger side of their measurements, which also go by the measurements on their website, not on the pattern itself. But yeah, I cut the seam allowance, so everything I'm tracing around where you can see like the Sharpie mark, that is where I have to sew it. So the first step I did was on the two, I think kind of like front side pieces, there is a dart there. So that is the first port of call. I pinned that. I then loosely sewed it by hand before then sewing on the machine, just so I didn't have pins in my way or anything. Just line that up as best as you can. So sew that, which is that's what it looks like on the template. I did cut that out so I could trace it. But yeah, sew that piece first, and that just creates like a little dart for you. And that's after it's been sewn on the machine. You can kind of see how it goes, and I'm just pulling out the little bit of hand stitching there so you can't see anything through. Then it's time to pin the main base top pieces together, which I'm doing here. I laid all of the pieces out just to give myself a visual sign of it, which I also found helpful. But hopefully that helps you figure out where they all line up. So I've again repeated the process of just loosely hand sewing it, so when I run it through the machine, as you can see here, it's not moving anywhere and there are no pins getting in my way. It is kind of annoying pulling out that hand stitching, but I just find it easier in the process, so I'm sewing it all there on the machine. Up next are the dreaded details. The template pieces are labeled per color, but looking at reference pictures, I didn't think there was really any silver on it. So the silver pieces I also made gold, but the big piece that I'm pointing on here, that center kind of on the seam line piece, there is no template for that. So do not waste your time looking for it like I did. I just used the main centerpiece where the seam line was, traced a line down, and then just created a line either side of it and a little bit of length to make my own, and I just test fit it along the seam line roughly, which I was happy with. For the gold pieces, I just used a gold leather hide that I had on hand. This is kind of more like a nappa leather. It was nice and thick, but easy to sew through, and just it wasn't too flimsy, so I was quite happy with the weight, texture and thickness of it for those details. So for some of the details, or for all of them, I think you've just got to flip them and then trace around them again. For a couple of the black pieces, as you can see there, it's like a V shape. I decided to actually make them solid and give it a bit of like a wadding or a batting, because it looked to be almost quilted when I looked at the reference art. And it does make it a little bit easier when cutting out those pieces, because you don't have to worry about cutting out the inside like I did. And as you can see there, the sort of chunky black pieces, that's what I was doing there. So I'm pinning everything down piece by piece here. I did start with the gold strips on that seam line at the front that you can see there, the one that we had to make before. It's really fudging weird how this top is, not the pattern, but like just the design in general, how things overlap, they underlap. So I started with the gold seam line pieces and then that big chunky kind of like black V sort of shape, and then I just tucked things under and over and went as sort of, I just used each piece as a guide and sort of worked around the center pieces and those gold long strips that we had to make. And just, keep looking at the reference or whatever reference you choose to look at. And then I did make some pieces a little bit longer than needed because I figured I could cut them a little bit shorter should I need to. So yeah, as you can see here, it's just pinning the pieces, and this did take forever. I had pinned one side first to make sure my process and idea worked, which luckily it kind of did. And yeah, you've got to sort of work. I did start mostly on the front and then slowly work my way around the back. As you can see, I've already done one side there. And if it's helpful, just sort of look at the reference and look at the seam lines on even the templates that is included with the pattern, like the breakdown picture, just to sort of see where things line up. And as you can sort of see here, that top piece that I mentioned on the template attaches to the back. It's another really fudging weird design, but that confused me for ages. So yeah, that is where that goes. And I did add a seam allowance and everything because I figured I could cut it off later myself if it was a little bit too big. So I'm just still lining up all the pieces as much as I can. A lot of this is going to be eyeballing it and just trying and praying to the cosplay gods to get it as even as you possibly can. Yay! No, it's not fun. I didn't enjoy this process at all. I like armor, and this was a big project for me. And I know those gold pieces at the top are not lined up, but by that point I just like it was close enough. The 5 meter rule, right? So you can see here where I pinned bits. The bits without pins, I did use some fabric glue, thanks to a suggestion from a friend of mine, just to help tack them down, because one, I was running out of pins and I was getting sick of running out of pins and stabbing myself everywhere. So once the glue had sort of dried enough, I didn't put a heap on there because I didn't want it to get too messy. I then ran everything through the machine, and luckily my Singer sewing machine is an absolute champion, and it got through these super thick layers of pleather and leather. I did the gold first with the gold thread, but where it overlaps black, I didn't sew it. I just sort of pulled it through, and then I cut those long threads after. So I did sort of run it forwards and back through the machine. I then went to all the black pieces, again overlapping only when I needed to make sure all these seam lines were in the right direction and I didn't have any like little squares sewn on any of the join lines. This was a really chunky piece, so I had sewn that on the machine first when it was not on the top, and I've pretty much just sewn over those same sewing lines to attach it to the top. So hopefully that made sense. So I'm trying to not create any new sewing lines on those chunky quilted pieces. So as you can see, I'm just going methodically, just trying to keep everything as flat and secure as I can. I just dragged it over the gold bit so I don't have a black piece of thread going over the gold, and then obviously when I go and sew the gold, that goes all the way through. So again, it's just working in layers slowly. Take your time, don't try to rush it too much. I know when you get to parts of a costume you kind of don't want to do, we do kind of run through it, but just be methodical about it. And here I'm just sewing more of the black pieces, so you can kind of see the seam lines a little bit there. and where they are, like the edges, and some of them aren't perfect. I did use a different pleather for the flatter black bits. Again, I just used stuff that I had on hand because I'm on a budget, like many of us are, and I'm just trying to cut costs. And here you can see where I've pinned the zipper in. Definitely do your mock-up first so you know that everything's going to fit how you like, and if it does, either use your mock-up as your template, or if you didn't have to make any adjustments to the paper one, you can use that again, of course. So here I have actually put the lining in. I didn't bother filming the lining because basically it's the exact same as making the base top. You can use the same pattern, you can save paper and save time and not bother with cutting the template pieces out because they are the same, and the instructions will tell you to create like a template piece that there is no template piece for. So to save time, definitely use the main pattern. So here I've sewn the zip in. I have sewn the lining in, which I will show. That might even be pinned, I can't even see that properly, but I will show you what the lining looks like on the inside. So obviously when you come to doing that, you just put it together as much as you can along the seam lines. Now, people that know me know that sleeves are the bane of my existence. I hate them. I seldom get them right. When I made my Lino inspired coat, I had a really bad time trying to make those. So I left the sleeves to last, and I sort of figured it didn't really matter. So when I sewed the edges of the top before, I did not sew any edges on the sleeves. So as you can see here, I'm pinning the mesh to the underside of the sleeve, which would, yeah. I had folded that over and pinned it first, so it wasn't like a raw edge. As you can see there, it's just a tidy folded edge. And I am now doing, what am I doing? I think is that lining? That might be lining. Yeah, so I did the lining as well from the same pattern pieces. And I tucked that in even with the outer pleather, so it was just a nice folded over edge, no raw edges. I did leave at the bottom there, which you can see I'm pinning it, but I did end up unpinning it. Some of those edges I did leave raw because of how I was going to sew them into the top itself. So as you can see here, this is what the lining and the pleather kind of look like. I'm just cutting little slots in there. So the fabric's not pulling where there's, like curves and bends and stuff. It just enables the fabric to sit flush and flat. So I'm just folding that over and I'm pinning them all together. So that bit that you can see that I'm pinning now is the outer sleeve there, which I did sew all of that by hand first, and then I ran it through the machine, and I've actually pinned it between the pleather and the lining of the main base of the top. So that's why with the base of the top, I did not sew that edge first. I pinned the sleeve in as best as I could, and then I just folded those edges over by hand like previously. So as you can see, this is what the sleeves look like pinned on. I did again sew those by hand before running them through the machine. It's not perfect, it's not super pretty up close. There is still hand stitching I need to pull out, but I was overall happy with it because of how much I was dreading those sleeves. Now, looking at the reference pictures, I sort of found her top looks to be almost like a really dark grey, which I did not have any grey pleather on hand, and I didn't want to go out and buy any. So I just mixed up some leather paint. I mixed up black, white, and a little bit of like a beigey brown, just to add a little bit of warmth to the grey. A lot of blacks are blue based, so if you add just straight white to it, they will go more of like a bluey grey, whereas I wanted this to have a little bit of warmth to it. So I just used quite a dry brush to do that, just so it kept a bit of almost like a weathering on the edges everywhere. But if I overshot it or got any of the black pieces that you can see there, I just went over with a smaller brush with the black and just fine-tuned a little bit. So that's what you can see how it looks in proper lighting with the grey paint, just keeping a little bit of depth around the edges of a little bit of black, so it's not a flat grey. I like weathering, you guys should know that by now. So finally we got to the stitching on the edge. Now I think from memory this was called a closed blanket stitch, so for those that want to know what it is, Google that. There was like a little YouTube video which it took me a little bit to get going, and trying to sew that by hand through that pleather. Embroidery needles aren't quite as sharp, but we got there in the end. For the sleeves, I actually did just use a 3D paint because I ran out of thread, and that thread was super expensive. So I'm like, I'm not buying like another $50 worth of thread. I was like, no. That's what the lining looks like. As you can see, it was just like flat seam lines on the inside. And this is the finished product. But yeah, there is still a little bit of hand stitching you need to pull out. The ornament at the front was 3D printed. So I'll also pop a link to what file I used in the description box, and I obviously will post a link to the pattern that I use as well, which is by FD Studios. Yeah, I just 3D printed it, and then like the front ornament, and I just super glued it down. You may need to resize it a little bit if you need to. I think I put mine down to about 94%, and that worked really well. But that is the finished top, and this was just a little quick test fit because I did a video for a really lovely company called JL Jewelry that had sent me one of their really gorgeous pieces of jewelry. So there is a video on my Insta for those that want to go see that. But that is why I do not have her pants on. It was just a quick run through with the costume top, the wig, which I still need to style a bit more, and the hair ornament, which is from the same 3D file maker as the chest piece. But yeah, that's how it's looking so far. So thanks for sticking around. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that video was helpful to some of you. If it was and you use this how I made it to make your own, please tag me. I'd love to see your results and share it on my own socials. Yeah, so thank you for those who have been sticking around. Thanks to those who have recently joined my channel. I think Bowser Tail somehow has been doing the rounds, which is, I'm not complaining, I'm happy with that. So yeah, thank you so much for sticking around. I'm hoping this year to have more consistent content, as I'm going to be focusing a lot on it, whether it's just sort of the longer videos like this or shorts. I will definitely try to at least get one video this kind of length, or like a how I made it kind of video, hopefully once a month, and then if I can I will dabble with some shorts in between. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If this video was helpful, it would be hugely appreciated if you could like, comment, something nice preferably, and subscribe, and I shall see you guys in the next video. Thank you, bye. Big hugs, bye.